And joining us now is the Labor member for Melbourne Ports, Michael Danby, still facing a challenge to hold his seat, but looks likely to retain it, I should say. Michael Danby, welcome to the program. What is the current state of play in your seat? Are you going to win? And also, what are the lessons out of this campaign as far as the Labor Party is concerned? Close, but no cigar.
Look, Bill Shorten has done a fantastic job. I think it's a bit of a story of the tortoise and the hare, and we have been constantly underestimated. I think the Prime Minister having to rely on people like Bob Katter, who's against all skilled migration, is a very difficult prospect. In Melbourne Ports, it's the wealthiest by per capita income Labor-held seat in Australia. My old mate, Senator Robert Ray, told me that I'd never hold it beyond the 2 terms when I was first elected in 1998, and we've walked on eggshells ever since. So I think we'll get past the penultimate exclusion, and the Greens will go out, and then most of their voters are really good people who have differences with us on asylum seekers, and we'll get a very large portion of their preferences. A lot of their voters in Melbourne Ports know sort of some of my sort of centre-left activities, whether it's for Tibet or opposition to the Grand Prix or animal welfare. So it's a prospect of Melbourne Ports, a Labor seat since 1906, facing a very big Liberal challenge, because it is a seat much more like Higgins and Kooyong.
Indeed, and it may well be that as the years unfold, the Liberals too will face even more significant challenges in middle-class seats like Higgins, for example. But looking at the Labor Party, one of the noticeable things about this election is the continuing drift of voters that Labor would have once expected to vote for them going to the Greens. And everywhere I went on polling day, if you looked on the at the people handing out how to vote cards, Labor's supporters were middle-aged. They were my age, but the people handing out how to vote cards for the Greens were all young. What does Labor do to address this challenge? Can it, or is Labor doomed to a situation where younger voters are simply going to find the Greens and other parties increasingly attractive?
Well, we have to address issues that are of interest to younger people, whether it's $100,000 degrees or whether it's issues of refugees and asylum seekers in the best way we can. Some of the young people, when I explained to them that we would have liked to increase our contribution to the UNHCR or to double the number of refugees, weren't interested. But as I hope, as they get married and get older and realise the complexities of life, they'll resume from being Green voters to Labor voters. So it's not necessarily something that's unfaceable. There's also a challenge too, Jim, of change in communications. A lot of younger Green supporters are hard to communicate with because they don't read newspapers, they don't watch TV, certainly not watching Sky. I might be able to get to them by rebroadcasting this on a YouTube and then emailing it out to as many as I've got who are under 30.
Michael Danby, when you get a lot of text message communication these days, it's not that uncommon to get it from banks, for example. You might get one from NAB, from ANZ. People at this election got a message. The sender simply said Medicare. Do you agree that's pretty deceptive?
Well, I think people should not be deceptive in any communications that they make. People got a robocall from my Liberal opponent suggesting that people, if they wanted to defeat the Greens, even if they were my supporters, should vote for him. So, you know, this is the boot's on a lot of feet with this, and we all have to make sure that the Electoral Act covers the kinds of things that were not thought of before in this era of modern technology. You know, these kind of ambushes at the last minute, unfair robocalls made to people, and I certainly experienced it both from the Greens and the Libs. It's whinging and complaining about it, but there are boundaries which should be established by the Joint Select Committee on Electoral Matters, providing guidelines to the Electoral Commission and unfair and untoward tactics at any level shouldn't be tolerated.
So you'd agree that would include, for example, this text message campaign. It simply said it was from Medicare, that would include, as the Prime Minister suggested today, at least a disclaimer like a normal ad would, who authorised that text message.
Well, I'm hoping to be on the Electoral Matters Committee, and I want to find out who sent that text out. Was it as you describe it? And let's put down some guidelines so those kind of things can't happen at the moment. Isn't it odd, Tom, that we have some restrictions with TV advertising at the last minute, but we haven't moved into all of these other areas where, in fact, more and more people are communicating with each other. So, let's have boundaries and fairness in all areas of the media.
You are on the Electoral Matters Committee, and this afternoon both the Prime Minister and Mr Shorten raised the prospect of electronic voting, something that the previous Parliament rejected as an idea. Both leaders were suggesting it's just 8 days is simply too long for the voters to wait to get a result of who is to govern them for the next 3 years. Is it as easy as it seems? Would you support a shift to electronic voting?
It's very, very difficult, Jim. Electronic voting depends on making sure people have the right IDs. You don't want people double voting. Once people vote, you don't want computers to lose vast swathes of vote. I think the long period of delays that we saw, including long lines on the day at booths that have never had them before all across the country, were due to the Electoral Commission being a bit paranoid about losing another box of 1,500 votes like they did in West Australia and forcing another state Senate election as they did over there.
Yes, patience can be a virtue, and this really is an auditing process that the Electoral Commission is going through, so it's not necessarily as simple as it might seem.
Especially with the Senate, Jim. I mean, they've actually got to scan those long Senate sheets and then hope that the computer accurately reports it. You don't want to put the scan on too quickly, because if you rip it away, you've lost a vote. It doesn't record exactly, and then the computer will add up all of the Senate votes with that enormous tablecloth that we had here in Victoria.
One other question facing the Labor Party going into this new Parliament, the population, the voters, are clearly very, very deeply divided indeed, a very narrow margin for the coalition. If you go back to 2010, that was an exceptionally rancorous Parliament where Tony Abbott started out with the tactic of trying to bring down the government every day, bring on an early election. Now, Bill Shorten said this afternoon that he was aiming to behave constructively. Do you think, though, that Labor should take a leaf out of Tony Abbott's book and try to bring on an election, another election, as soon as possible, or do you think the mood is different and that the voters would punish you at another early poll should you behave in that way?
Well, I can't imagine Bill Shorten running out of the Parliament, as we saw former Prime Minister Tony Abbott doing. I can't imagine that we'll make false accusations against the Speaker in an orchestrated campaign to denigrate him now that have now all proved to have been false. So I think we'll play it tough. We'll be responsible, and people don't know this, but in the Senate, after putting through privacy amendments and sunset clauses and inspections by senior public services and ombudsmen, we generally support the government on matters of national security to protect the safety of all Australians. So we'll be responsible where it's counted, but we're going to give the Prime Minister a tough time, and I'm looking forward to those first few days in question time. Look, after all, the Liberal Party are deeply divided. You can see the Conservatives growling all across the country over this election result. There's an extraordinary article by the Deputy Editor of the Herald Sun, Mr McCrann, calling on Mr Turnbull to resign from Parliament, let alone the Prime Ministership, just the day after the election. So there's blood in the water, and you can hardly expect, Jim, the Labor Party to sort of not put its toe in.
Indeed. Michael Danby,
Danby,
congratulations on your result there in the seat of Melbourne Ports. And commiserations that the Labor Party didn't quite get there, but democracy has had its day. Malcolm Turnbull back in office, the Labor Party back in opposition for another 3 years. After the break, the rest of the news, and there is plenty of it, that is for sure, particularly overseas. Terrible news from the United States.